The meeting of the Planning Commission for Monday, May 13th, 2024 is called to order at 6:37 PM. Iris, can you call order, please?
Stewart,
Here.
Canoni. Mitchell is excused. Rigby,
Here.
Shock is excused. Moreno,
Here.
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 Thank you for calling roll. Council Liaison Masin Mabuk,
Hi.
do you have an
yeah.
update?
Yeah, I'm prepared. I'm sorry last time my boys were getting their citizenship, so I had to be there for a party they organized. So,
Absolutely,
but
congratulations.
yeah, thank you. But I had here what I wanted to share with you was that, of course, April was the proclamation of Earth Day, and we also discussed with Clackamas County. They came and presented the project they have on Stafford and Child intersection. Did you hear about that? But unfortunately, it's against the chapter that was voted, chapter 10, for the parks. So we just told them there's nothing we can do. The city cannot. You know, the citizen of Lake Oswego voted to not do any building, especially building roads or stuff. So I think they're discussing now with all the parties to see where we are going. We don't know what the county can do, if they can force their way to the city or something, but we try to, you know, be good neighbors with them. But in the same time, we have to respect also our citizens' will on the parks. So it was a very difficult meeting, but we end up understanding each other. And we also approved what you did last time. You recognized the Mary's Landing neighborhood. So council voted unanimously to recognize them as the new neighborhood association in town, and also we talk about the Hillsdale Trail. It's a regional trail. I didn't know about that. It's from Hillsdale to Lake Oswego. They were asking us to build some sign for them, which we approved, and so that was what I wanted to, and also Lake Oswego Parks. You notice that there's a new branding thing. They changed their logo. It's beautiful. I think you'll see something new with Parks and Recreation. That was for April, and for May, the City Council and Lake Oswego School Board had a joint meeting, which was very interesting. We do it every year. We meet and talk about our common things. You may realize that the most important thing we discussed was, the community center. So there's a lot of people going around, but the city knows that the library is very old, and we are over its capacity since maybe 20 years ago. It's no longer something, it's no even, it's not retrofitted for earthquake and everything. We need to build a new library, but we have to have a place. Some folks think that the place would be in Lake Grove, and one like the Lake Grove Elementary School, but we are asking if the board, the Lake Oswego School District, think that they have to let go, we could use it with them as a community center and central office, build, offices, and we build a great community center for the whole community with everything you can imagine as a community center. But it's up to the city, the Lake Oswego School District. When the time comes, we will move, and try to build that place. And there's of course, some community members who don't think like that, and we honor their thought and their point of view, and we are in a listening mode with all the communities. And the Tryon Creek waste treatment plant, water treatment plant, which you may be very interested. You know that EPCOR was going to do the work with us, but from this almost $600 million, it was going to be close to $1 billion, and we finally couldn't do it. We just had to, because it's a design, build, operate, you know, and manage it all, like, and maintain. DBOM, you know, those, and it's a PPP. It was a public-private, the P3, like they say. So we did not, they designed it to 90%, which we paid already, we have it, and we are working with the special director of special project, Dr. Broders, had a beautiful presentation of the future of that, and what they recommend, and we finally voted, was the DBOM, design, build, operate, and maintain. And what we want is, if any party that's taken after the bid, if they want to continue with our 90% design, it would be helpful. You know, we already designed the plant to 90%. It's only 10% left that they either can do, which probably they will. So that's the main thing we discussed. And something that council has on last Friday, we went to visit the new affordable housing project that will open on the 20th. It's 100 units in Merrillhurst. It's something really beautiful, very beautiful. That's really something that we should be proud of. It's like the apartment that are here. That's very well built, very beautiful. We were there, the mayor and Councillor Afghan and Councillor, Trudy Corrigan and Rachel, we were there, and it was a wonderful thing. They make us visit the stuff, and you know, the families that are going to live there will really appreciate, and that's the importance of affordable housing, that it's not on things that we build because it's cheap or something, but they build it very well. And so that's what I have for now. If you have questions, I can answer.
Thank you. Do we have questions?
Staying here. Hello. Thank you.
Thank you. We have the approval of minutes for April 22nd, 2024. Do we have, can we have a motion to approve the minutes?
Move to approve.
Go ahead.
Move to approve.
We have a, can we have a second?
Second.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. April 22nd, meeting minutes are approved. Next we have, do we have anyone signed up for public comment, Iris? No. And Commission for Citizen Involvement, general updates. I have an invitation to Uplands Neighborhood Association General Membership Meeting, and it is May 16th, 2024 at 7 p.m. at the Lake Oswego Junior High Library. It is a semi-annual meeting to hear about and discuss what is happening in the neighborhood. They have a guest, the Lake Oswego Fire Department, doing a presentation, and they're also going to have neighborhood communication. There is a QR code available, but if anyone's interested, they can contact Tom Bland, who's the chair, at blandt50@hotmail.com. And that is the only communication that I have and the only general update that we have. Then we have update, the 2024 update on the city's transportation systems plan and pathways program. The Planning Commission will receive an update from the city's traffic engineer on the Transportation Systems Plan and Pathways Program. So is Will Farley, Assistant City Engineer, here?
Present. I'll just wave at you for next slide. Or do I have a clicker? And it works. All right. Good evening. My name's Will Farley. I am currently wearing two hats. I am the city's assistant city engineer as well as the traffic engineer. I just recently accepted the assistant city engineer position. I'm coming here to kind of give an overall update of how the Transportation Advisory Board is doing and how they're prioritizing projects. This is a real high-level update. You feel free to ask me questions. I can answer what I can on them. So to start, there's one that the Planning Commission should be familiar with. This is an overall arcing view of plans, starting with the comprehensive plan. And make sure my notes are going too so I can see what I'm saying. So this document sets the goals, policies, and action measures that are intended to guide the community in making decisions. It's almost required reading for the Planning Commission and anyone that needs to develop in the city. The plan is intended for use by all those who participate in the city's land use planning process, including local officials, persons with development interests, state, regional, and federal agencies, neighborhood and community groups, and citizens representing all interests. The most recent update was adopted in 2014 after a 3-year process to revise it. Jessica or Eric can correct me if I'm wrong, but I recall hearing that the plan will be receiving an update in the near future to become compliant with recent housing policies and the climate-friendly and equitable cities rules, or equitable communities. I never get it right. Moving on, this is kind of my wheelhouse as a traffic engineer. As part of the comprehensive plan, there's the Transportation System Plan. This is the document that the Transportation Advisory Board works within when advising City Council and the Budget Committee on what projects to work towards next. The purpose of the Lake Oswego Transportation System Plan is to identify and facilitate implementation of an integrated multimodal transportation system that will meet the needs of the city residents, businesses, and visitors for the next 20 years. I'm kind of just taking these quotes from the summary page. They're written the best way possible. The Transportation System Plan considers regional and statewide transportation goals and policies and their impacts on Lake Oswego. We previously updated this plan in 2014 with a very small amendment in 2017 that included some projects identified as in the Southwest Employment Area Plan and included some revisions to codes and policies. This document will also need to be updated in the near future to be compliant with the new CFEC rules, mostly regarding operation metrics of our intersections and roadways. Currently, it's looking like this update may begin in around 2029. We're waiting on ODOT to kind of instruct us because they need to come to the table and help us with State Street. And they have dedicated funding for updating transportation system plans for the CFEC rules. We're looking into an interim update before then to include some projects we've identified from neighborhood outreach, as well as like the McVeigh-Stafford corridor vision study that we recently did. So kind of going into the weeds of the plans a little bit, when drafting the transportation system plan back in 2014, we went through an extensive public process, planning process, spanning a few years that identified nearly 200 projects, ranging from your small pathway projects to new traffic signals to even a few bridges in it. Of these, 130 projects were identified as a bicycle or pedestrian-focused project. Since 2014, We have completed 7 pathway projects and have another 5 in design that are expected to be constructed in the next few years. We had 3 transit projects identified, with one of them being completed, which was to install some bus shelters. And then we had 58 projects planned for roadways, of which 8 have been completed. One of those was the very significant Boones Ferry Road project. So kind of going further into our plans, slightly related to the TSP, is our capital improvement plan. This is a 6-year planning tool that identifies infrastructure and major equipment investments that are necessary to provide the city services. Projects in the transportation system plan can be considered when determining what has funding and what is a priority in the next 6 years. This document is planned for an update this upcoming spring and summer to evaluate our upcoming funding over the next 6 years and where we want to focus our efforts in the city. So, I was on the right one. So, for this current biennium, which is the 24-25 biennium, we have around 175 identified transportation projects. Of these, 115 are focused on bicycle or pedestrian facilities, with 2 projects being completion of the 9 pathways projects identified in the TSP. So one project in the capital improvement plan can be multiple projects identified in the TSP as a bundle. The plan identifies 32 roadway projects, but none are expected to be funded in the next 6 years. These are usually significant lane additions or really large-scale reconstruction of roadways. 15 projects are identified for intersections, of which 6 are expected to be funded, 2 of which are pedestrian intersections specifically. Our pavement preservation projects are usually identified and funded when the plan is put together, kind of coming up with our next, what streets are the lowest priority or the highest priority to be redone. 2 of these projects that are coming up in this one have a significant pedestrian or bicycle facility component. None of the 6 bridges are funded in this one, and that's a large significant capital to replace a bridge. So, let's see, on to costs. If I can find my right slide. It moved. What is a meeting without a little bit of technical difficulties? So kind of going overall on the project costs, and for this CIP, we expected to spend about $16 million on capital projects. The pavement rehabilitation is $2 million, which is down from previous bienniums by about $4 million, if I remember right. We reallocated funds after our paving bond program ended, and just worked on some smaller rehab projects. Lakeview Boulevard is a significant project between South Shore and Iron Mountain. It includes the reconstruction of that roadway, redoing some stormwater facilities. It's funded in assistance with an ARPA grant, which is an American Rescue, I can't remember that one. It was passed back in 2021, if I remember right, and it helped cities fund after the COVID pandemic. ARPA, American Rescue Recovery. Yep. For the pathways, we have 4 projects coming up with a funding of about $6.5 million. Intersection improvements, we have 5 projects identified that it costs about $1 million. And then I have Jean and Pilkington on here separately. That is a new signal going on at that, or being constructed at that intersection, which is funded using system development charges, which are specific for capacity improvements. So now that you kind of know the costs, here's how we're getting the money to build the projects. Most of the city's transportation projects come from the street fund. For this biennium, we're anticipating about receiving about $23 million through the sources listed up here. There are some things to keep in mind about these sources, though, as we move ahead. Gas tax is expected to decline with more fuel-efficient vehicles and electric vehicles. This is anticipated by ODOT as well as on a federal level. And there's conversations starting to come up of how do we supplement the gas tax with something that's more resilient. The street maintenance fee was recently increased by 50% back in July of '23, with the priority of spending being directed towards pathways, which is why you see a good influx of new pathway projects. The county vehicle registration fee was new as of 2020 and has been a great infusion of funds, especially in a time when our funding took a pretty big hit from the COVID pandemic. Money from the general fund comes from property taxes is divided in the budget at council's discretion. Typically, the street fund receives about $6 million every 2 years, but priorities shifted about $2 million over to some parks projects that needed a little extra help to get to the finish line. We're expecting to get some of this allocation back towards the street fund, hopefully in the next budget. System development charges, as I mentioned before, are fees accrued through development and can only be used to increase the capacity of our transportation system. With less development happening in the city, this revenue can be expected to decrease. So now that I've gone over the plans and funding, I can change direction on how the Transportation Advisory Board has been working on moving some of these projects forward for funding. Back in 2019, there was a desire from council to start chipping away at some of these projects in the TSP. As you saw, many of them were being left unconstructed. They enlisted the assistance with the Transportation Advisory Board, which began prioritizing these TSP projects in ways that would benefit students walking and biking to schools. The advisory board worked through several meetings in 2019 and 2020 to develop a scoring system based on the functional classification of the roadway, arterials receiving the highest priority, school type, elementary schools receiving the most points, proximity, the closer the school, the more points it would get, and if the project completed a gap in our system. This map up here on the right kind of shows where they started with, I think, 43 projects to start kind of filtering through and prioritizing. And then in 2021, City Council adopted a goal to improve transportation connections, mobility, and safety for all types of trips in Lake Oswego, and decided to increase funding to pedestrian facilities, beginning with these safe routes to school. I have to be careful. There are two different safe routes to schools that kind of gets mixed up. There's an Oregon program that's a safe routes to school that does funding and grants and action plans. And then we generally call our program a safe routes to school. Ours is just no way funded by the state. This is all on the city. So funding was reallocated from the pavement preservation projects to help proceed with spending about $2.2 million in designing and beginning construction of 4 of 8 of the TAB's original priorities. Douglas Way, Hallinan, and Boca Raton were all completed in fall of last year, and Lanewood Douglas Circle is expected to be going under construction later this summer. Remaining on that prioritization list, not up here, but on the map, are Boones Ferry Road behind Lake Oswego High School, Bryant Road all the way from Boones Ferry Road down to Childs, and Goodall Road. These projects cover a significant amount of ground, have significant straights, and would likely need a significant amount more of funding. Boones Ferry Road, I think, was about 16 million around, and Bryant was about 18 million. You can see the map up here of kind of where the pathways were located when they were prioritizing. And since everybody loves a good before and after shot, I was going to show you kind of before and after at the 3 we have constructed. This is Douglas Way right there at Lake Grove Elementary. We separated the pathway either vertically or horizontally away from the roadway to provide a little bit more buffer. Half of it is concrete sidewalk and half of it is asphalt pathway in front of the school. Moving on, this is Hallinan Street behind Hallinan Elementary School. This one goes all the way from Hemlock up to Glenmarie and even further up to the school's access. Most of it is a concrete sidewalk seen here that's separated with a curb. When it gets up to about Upper Cherry, Glenmarie, to the rest of the way to the school, it's an asphalt pathway. And then this is Boca Raton, which was the most recent one completed, providing a separated sidewalk all the way from Bonabray down to Atwater. So with those in mind, and the street fee increase back in July of 2023, City Council was able to fund an additional $4 million to design and construct the next set of pathways recommended by the Transportation Advisory Board. They worked through the same exact scoring methodology and reviewed 14 more projects that were basically next on the list and tried to figure out which ones they wanted to recommend next. Five of those projects rose to the top of being consistent with what they wanted. These pathways on Pilkington, Meadowlark, Treetop, and Carmen are expected to begin design with public input this summer, with the goal of construction starting next summer. I say pathways, but Pilkington is actually two projects. They were separated for some reason for Jean Way to Willow and then Willow to Boones Ferry Road. Since the Jean Pilkington intersection is being constructed with a signal, we're just including that segment as part of the signal and then building the rest to complete the gap. So the Transportation Advisory Board's next steps. Since 5 more projects were funded for this biennium, we're going to start taking a dive into the next set of projects to recommend for funding starting in 2025. I plan to take those 3 projects that were kind of put to the side at the beginning, so Boones Ferry Road, Bryant, and Goodall. We're going to kind of break them up and say, is there a segment that makes sense, that is more affordable than spending so like Bryant, spending the entire $16 to $18 million. Is there something that's critical that we can spend for less? We're going to hopefully bring this to the table to discuss on our July 18th meeting in a couple months. To add to the pathways, I also want to bring forward a review of the city's bicycle facilities in an effort to start identifying gaps in the same way that these pathways did. I would love to see us have some connected bike routes within the city that people can use and enjoy comfortably without needing to ride or share a lane with high-speed traffic, such as on Country Club. This probably won't come in front of the Transportation Advisory Board until their October meeting. We're currently on a quarterly schedule. So also on their next steps, last month they were briefed on Tigard's 20 is Plenty program and how it was deployed throughout their city. I'm planning on returning to the board in October as well to have with some discussion on how we can begin to implement a 20 is Plenty in Lake Oswego on our residential streets. Not planned currently, but picking up a little bit of steam, and yes, I intend the pun, is developing an approach to establish a rail quiet zone in the city of Lake Oswego. This can be rather complicated with how our rail is laid out, and it has the potential to be quite expensive. We have some rail crossings that currently have no protection that we would have to provide gates at, and we have some crossings on private property that we would have to figure out some details on. I have recently been able to reconnect with the Oregon Department of Transportation and the FHWA on kind of scheduling some diagnostics of our crossings to see what improvements we're going to be on the hook for if we want to move forward with it. As we mentioned earlier, we're looking at possibly taking a few projects from the McVeigh-Stafford Corridor Vision Study and a few pathways not identified in our last update of the Transportation System Plan to provide an interim update of just including these projects in to put them on the list. We could not do anything that would modify performance or operations, or because that might trigger a significant update, which ODOT has requested to wait for the 2029 to where they can provide funding and assist us. The Transportation Advisory Board meeting provides opportunity for public comments even when they're not on agenda items. So if you see something that you'd like to hear talked about at that board, anyone's welcome to come in and talk during the open public comment period. And with that, I open it to questions.
Any questions?
You guys can't let me out of this that easily.
I have a question. Looking at the pathways projects that you were showing, it looked like most of them that took the form of like a sidewalk, basically. And is that because most of these were school related? Because as someone who's done some bike commuting and some walking along roads, really the impediment to having a usable pathways in a lot of instances seems like it's just a width thing. If the shoulder is too narrow, you can't walk there, you can't bike there. And like on Country Club, it often has a very wide shoulder, so it's one of the better areas for bike commuting until you hit Oswego, and then often you're sort of on the street. So are all of those projects going to look like a sidewalk, or are there sort of more marginal gains that can be had, or are these more like big projects like that?
So they're rather large projects because we want to keep a separation. We do look at some asphalt pathways that are separated horizontally from the road, but you still need about 3 foot of space between the pathway and the road. We want to keep them separated because we have these shoulder pathways that were built a while back that aren't really adequate for pedestrian facilities. They have to share with bikes. They get constrained rather easily. So our policy is to build either a sidewalk that is vertically separated by a 6-inch curb or has some separation from the roadway.
Well, you guys are the experts, but to me, it just looks like, if you have a lot of projects, you're trying to do that. I mean, that's a pretty, capital intensive way to make the gains. Would that be correct to say?
There's no cheap sidewalk project in the city anymore. All the easy ones have been built. So there's something significant probably to every one of those listed in the transportation system plan. There are concerns when just, let's say you widen a shoulder pathway on a roadway, you can increase travel speeds of vehicles. It increases a lot more concerns rather than just trying to keep people off the roadway. Impervious area requires stormwater systems. So if we're going to be expending money to widen the road and put in stormwater systems, it's already getting to the point to where we might as well build the sidewalk or separate a pathway.
Thank you.
Are you familiar with the Douglas Way pathway that was completed?
Yes, sir.
Can you tell me, is any of that pathway, did you have to exert a right-of-way over the property that the sidewalk occupied, or was this something that was already reserved to the city?
I believe most of Douglas Way I don't think there was any right-of-way acquisition for that one. I believe all of that property was within the right-of-way. If there was any right-of-way, it was very little that we had to get for it. Most of the projects that have been constructed had very little need for right-of-way. They were built within the existing constraints of what we own as public right-of-way.
Do you know how that was established? You know how would you know whether or not the property in itself has a right-of-way on it, that the city?
Surveying, it's basically the right-of-way. We are very lenient on where the public right-of-way is and how some people can use it as their front yard. We usually find out by survey. We'll go in and have our surveyor or a surveying consultant go in and document where the legal lot of record is. And some distance into their yard can be right-of-way.
All right, is there a standard right-of-way? In other words, is there a width that is a standard that you can go by?
Well, the right-of-way width, we try to get to a certain amount based on when we have development in places. Certain roadways, depending on their use, arterials usually go to about 90+ feet of public right-of-way. Local streets, we generally go for about 50 feet to 60 feet of public right-of-way. There is no amount that's specific to in front of a property of how much can be right-of-way. It just depends on how the roadway was laid out. And Evan's going to correct me on something.
Well, yeah, I'm going to correct you when you say we're lenient on what can be in the right of way. We have a code section which specifies what items can be within the right of way without getting an encumbrance permit, an encroachment permit rather, from the city engineer. Vegetation being one of them, as long as it doesn't interfere with traffic, site distance, etc. But there are others that are listed as well, like mailboxes and that sort of thing. Always subject to the right of the city engineer to determine whether it interferes with the flow of traffic. And if it does, then it has to come out. So the leniency is established by code.
And then the other question I ask is, you know, when you're establishing these paths, and let's say they abut the outside limit of the street, you've got trees lining along there. Do you run into a problem as far as dealing with the removal of those trees, or?
We could. So for like, let's see, Douglas Way actually had a couple trees that it looked like we were going to hit. So we had to go through the tree removal process in case we did hit it. I think one ended up coming out. So those pathway projects, the way we did the first set is we went to each of the neighborhoods where those pathways were being constructed and had a blank slate that we put in front of them, like, hey, what are the priorities you have for constructing this pathway? If trees are on there that they really wanted to save, we would look at that as a constraint and try not to impact the trees. So we had many of the cases where some didn't have any trees that we'd have to remove. I think Hallinan we built into the street instead of going into people's yards. Even though we had the available right-of-way, it was a significant constraint to people not to lose their irrigation and some of their landscaping. And we had the street width available that we instead built into the roadway instead of out of the roadway. Douglas Way has quite a bit of constraints. It's not the 50 feet of public right-of-way that we would typically have, or that we typically like to see. So we had to work within that more of a constraint.
Okay, so I've got a couple more questions. I notice on Douglas Way, you mentioned that I've seen the stakes that are on the side of the street. They actually go into an area that does require a removal of at least a couple of trees, and they're fairly large trees. Does that run afoul of the tree code for you? I mean, does your establishment, are you able to do these things without going through the process of getting clearance from the city and so forth?
We still have to go through a process to remove the trees, and Jessica can help me elaborate more on it, but we do have to file the appropriate permit unless it's a hazard tree or I think some of the other dying trees as such. I'll let Jessica answer that one in further detail.
Yes, thank you, Will. So the city has to get a tree cutting permit to remove any tree that's 6 inches in diameter or greater, just like everyone else. And that includes hazard trees, dead trees, or tree removal for pathway. Typically, if you're removing a tree over 6 inches in diameter for pathway, it involves what's called a type 2 tree cutting process, which means there will be a public notice that will be posted. Folks can submit comments. If it's a significant tree, which often they can be, then they're required to look at alternatives to removal that might lessen the impact on the number of trees removed. So the answer to that is absolutely the city has to go through that process just like any other normal citizen or developer would in order to get any tree removed.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Okay, I got a couple for you. You have such a big list of things to get after, which is great. What's your decision-making process of which ones rise up to the top to actually, be worked on first?
Well, the Transportation Advisory Board did some of them with the school-related pathways. For other projects, it's what is the highest need, what is the highest priority, what road needs to be rebuilt, what intersection is failing. We kind of go as where is it needed the most, kind of in the budget committee and the council discussions. discussions with the city engineer. She helps kind of prioritize them as well.
And so a lot of the community in that area, I assume, gets involved to bring an issue
Yep,
to you, and then you would analyze it and say, yeah, it's a bigger problem.
yep.
Okay.
And the public process can play pretty heavily into which ones rise to the top.
And the advisory board, who makes that up? You know, where do those people come from?
So the Transportation Advisory Board's a volunteer committee, much like yourself,
Okay.
that council appoints, and they provide, I am the staff liaison. I'll bring them whatever they want to see. Like on the Pathways projects, they wanted to see 43 that we identified near schools. And then we bring those in and they go, okay, we need to come up with a system to kind of prioritize these. And we evaluated like several things like, is cost an appropriate thing to look at? Well, they're all expensive, and we didn't want that to weigh in on which ones we prioritize. Boones Ferry Road behind the high school is a high priority. We don't want that, the cost of it to detract from how high a priority we think it is. So we didn't use cost. We looked at the roadway type because that kind of tells you how much traffic is on it. An arterial roadway carries the most amount of traffic. It's one of the major connections, roadways. So that kind of we'll set up that criteria and say arterial is the highest, but local streets, people usually can walk within a local street to their destination and share it with traffic. Visibility is usually not constrained. So generally, that's the least priority is the local streets. And you can scale it higher based on collector or whatever. And then they just came up with the different criteria, and it took several meetings of like, here's where they would balance on this kind of criteria and if we thought it made sense. And they would deliberate and like which ones they liked and which ones they didn't.
Okay. And the last question I had for you was the pathways that connect to schools. I mean, I understand, you know, the kind of the safety aspect. Do you have any stats on exactly what % of kids walk to school these days?
That one is really hard to find, and it's changed quite a bit since COVID. And I mean, we saw a big uptick in walking back in COVID. The idea behind the pathways is if you don't provide the facility, no one's going to walk if it's uncomfortable and they feel unsafe. But if you provide the facility, people may walk. We haven't done any studies to see how much more walking. We've gotten several thank yous and like, hey, this is a lot more comfortable to walk down Douglas from the park to get to school. It's much easier to walk on Hallinan to get to the school. We've received community feedback saying that the walking's a lot better, but we don't have any numbers to show how many more people are walking.
Yeah, okay, because that would just, you know, I was curious because every time I'm anywhere near a school, especially either in the morning or when they're exiting, it's a line of cars. There's nobody's walking. So it's just an interesting one in terms of, I understand the strategy behind it, but is it really being used by the people that you thought, you know, in terms of students? So I was just curious what you were using to kind of evaluate, you know, next steps for it. And it's great to hear, the last piece was about the silent train, you know, aspect and what's next with all of that. So it's just nice that they are finally responding back to you and you're creating a dialogue with the railroad.
Yep, we finally, I tried to email them every month trying, hey, where are we at on this and what's the process? And they finally got back, oh, we can't believe we dropped this. And so we're starting to try to put together a diagnostic team of looking at what improvements are going to be required of it.
And I do have one more. I think it's great to have you come in and talk about the projects that you're working on. How do we be more collaborative with you and the teams you work with, just in terms of maybe more of it's like this where you come and give an update and, you know, we get a chance to not so much comment, but just understand what's going on in your world? I think we had talked about this before, doing more of this just so we get a better feel for being outside our little bubble. So it's great for you to come and do this. I really appreciate it.
That's a good question. I mean, collaboration can be many things, from like me coming in to provide an update occasionally when you guys are curious of what's going on, to checking out the TAB meetings, the agendas. Either it's a quarterly meeting, we send out the agenda a week in advance, see if a topic is on there that you're interested in. You feel free to come provide public comment and help the discussions along. We're a very interactive group. I know it's a goal to try to increase collaboration, and we're trying to do what we can, whether it be updates to other boards by the liaisons or just encouraging coming to see a meeting.
Great, thanks.
Did these pathways get started because of the public interest in it?
A lot of the surveys were showing that there was a big interest in more walkable areas.
Yeah, I think the Douglas Way pathway has got to be a very popular thing because there's a lot more people that do walk on that now. The problem with that is that the traffic is restricted along that way. So nowadays, when you drive on that in the morning with the buses coming down and feeding the schools and so forth like that, that's pretty problematical. But it's probably a good idea to have a pathway there because it wasn't walked very often before.
It wasn't walked very often. I think it was just like separated by a little asphalt curb.
Yes.
Any other questions? Comments? Thank you for this very valuable information for the update. Assistant City Engineer Will Farley.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Do we have other business to discuss? Community Development Director Jessica. Sorry, I know you're coughing. You're not feeling well.
Thank you, Chair. I first want to apologize for not being there in person this evening, but I'm trying very hard not to pass on this terrible, terrible cold that's going around. I do have a couple of updates for you, and then I can go over the upcoming schedule. And I'll start with the updates. At the last meeting, one of the commissioners had asked about the then upcoming chamber forum on the parking mandate and future of Lake Grove and downtown. That occurred on April 23rd. I attended that forum, and I actually didn't know, I apologize, I didn't know that they were charging. This is something that the chamber was putting on. The city was sort of co-hosting, providing the event space, and then of course the city manager was speaking at that event, but I had no idea that there was a cost associated with it. But I can tell you that in general, they just, the city manager gave an overview of the state mandates that are requiring us to do these parking reforms, as the commission is very well aware of, as we've had a few study sessions on it. She also discussed the Lake Grove Village Center plan, which is part of our comprehensive plan. It's one of our overlay districts, as well as the East End district, which is our downtown area. And it was really just a general overview of this is what was envisioned per the comp plan and per the East End redevelopment plan. And then she also had a guest speaker from the Urban Development Partners, and they are the developers that are building the North Anger project. And he gave an update on that project and also talked about how they are providing parking for that project and how that's changed a little bit since the CFEC rules went into effect. After that, there was question and answer time period. So overall, I don't think there was anything in there that the commissioners really missed out on. I think you all are very well versed on what's happening with the parking mandates, and I'm sure are aware of the East End and Lake Grove Village Center areas. But certainly if you have any questions, I'd happy to answer that. The next update I wanted to let you on is that the City Council approved Ordinance 2945 at their May 7th City Council meeting, and that ordinance established a nonprofit corporation affordable housing tax exemption. This is actually one of the housing production strategies that the Commission and the City Council have been reviewing over the past many months as we've been working on our housing production strategy, as well as the housing production task force. This exemption has received broad support from all of these groups, and it's basically a tax exemption that's available to nonprofit corporations such as Mercy Housing Northwest, Hacienda, who provide affordable housing that meets certain criteria per the state Oregon revised statute that authorizes the exemption. Each city must adopt it in order for them to be able to grant those exceptions or exemptions, excuse me. You may or may not be aware that Mercy Housing Northwest, who are just about finished constructing the Mercy Greenbrae project at Merrillhurst Commons, which you all visited back in the fall, they had requested that the city council, if they supported that, which that did get supported at your last joint study session in April, on April 2nd, that they consider adopting it before the final housing production strategy is adopted. And the reason for that is that it allowed Mercy Housing Northwest to underwrite that tax exemption when they convert their construction loan to the permanent loan, their permanent loan this summer. And they estimate that being able to do that would save them about $1.2 million over the life of the loan, which they can is much needed funding that they can use for maintenance costs for the Mercy Greenbrae housing project, as well as unexpected costs, which inevitably come up, and of course, programming. So it brings a huge benefit to them. It is, of course, available to any nonprofit corporation that provides affordable housing. So it's not just limited to the Mercy Greenbrae project. So for instance, a Hacienda project could also apply for that tax exemption. So the city council did pass that. It is going to become effective on June 6th. And I just wanted you to update that because that was great news. And it is something that will be included in our, or at least so far, in the draft housing production strategy. And it's something that we can kind of already tick off the list. Before I move on to the upcoming schedule, is there any questions on those?
Any questions?
No.
No. Thank you for the update.
Okay. All right, as far as your upcoming schedule I just want to remind you that your next meeting is held on a Wednesday because it falls on the Monday falls on Memorial Day weekend. So the meeting will be held on May 29th, Wednesday. At that meeting, we are having guests from the Department of Land Conservation and Development who are going to make a presentation on the Housing Accountability and Production Office, which the DLCD is in the process of forming and will need to be effective in 2025. So they're going to give a presentation to the commission on that. And then on June 10th, there's going to be a work session with another one of our engineering staff on the stormwater code amendments. And I would remind you that I will be covering the next two meetings, and then after that, Planning Manager Olson will be back from parental leave. So that is all I have for updates.
Wonderful.
Schedule.
Thank you so much. And hope
one
you
thing.
feel better soon.
Thank you.
When is our next, I'll call it a field trip?
I am not aware of any field trips that are planned at this point, but that's certainly something we can talk about with Planning Manager Olson when he returns.
Look, we're all laughing. We like field trips. I mean,
We
they're.
already
I
asked
love
him
them
for it.
too.
We'll find a couple, will you?
Hope you feel better soon, Jessica. Thank you. Okay, so 7:31, this meeting is adjourned.